Hey, welcome to the Karma Zero Show. I am joined today by Adam Levenson of Digital Operative out in sunny San Diego. Adam, how the heck are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. Other than getting eaten alive by bugs out here in Texas, I'm mostly hanging in there. Um, the bugs are wild out here, man. They're bigger, they're badder, they bite harder. My ankle's all swolled up. Um, so it's not exactly San Diego out here, man. That's all I'm saying.
And every house comes with an orange wall.
No, every house does not come with an orange wall. I had to buy some orange background paper. It's about $26. And I think it was worth every penny,
Oh, you didn't
personally.
paint. You didn't paint it. It's just paper.
It's just paper. I'm gonna paint it though. I'm gonna paint this whole dang wall. And that's my next task. Um in my continual journey to upgrade my video background. What I want to do, you remember like the mural in the Magento LA office? It was like
Mm,
what did it say? Ecom the future of ecom. I don't remember what it was. I want to get somebody to paint a mural. That would be ideal.
we just had someone come in and do that.
Shut your face.
No,
Did
I'm
you?
serious. Yeah. There's
That's
gonna
so
be
cool.
there's two walls. One has our values on it, and that one is like floor to ceiling. I think it's like 12 feet, 14 feet, something like that. And then we're doing another one in the entryway when you walk in.
Dude, that's freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's some
Um,
Instagram artist. I don't know, it's someone they found her somewhere. I
really?
don't know.
You guys have an interesting company, man. I like how you guys roll. Um, Speaking of your values, Adam, what are your values over there at Digital Operative?
Oh, there's a lot of them, so now I have to go. You're gonna
You
make me
don't
go
rem
and no,
you don't remember your values?
I want to make sure I get them all because they're important.
Oh man, that's how you know your mission statement isn't clear enough if you don't have it memorized.
No, no, no. I have it memorized, but I want to get them in the correct order.
Right order. Gotta get
Well, there's
you
too
wouldn't
many.
want.
There's a lot of them. So like, well, okay. So we have a mantra, and then we have sort of our values, right? And so our mantra is pursuing growth together. And then that sort of feeds back into our values, which are passion. So I'll count them: passion, integrity, bravery, creativity, relentless, growth, support, and results.
Nice. Um, bravery is interesting. I actually noticed yesterday. I think I saw a tweet from Classy Llama that they had their llama thing, and I think they have a thing on bravery, some sort of a swag. And bravery is like an interesting word because you usually think about it in less of a business context and more of like a personal context, like somebody hits your lady and you got to go, you know, stab him in the face to defend her honor or something like that. But um, what, that's a
I
bad
thought I
example.
thought this was a family show.
This is it. Sorry about that. Tap them gently on the shoulder and say, "Sir, that
I
was
love
not okay."
tab.
I love tap. Um, so, like, how do you think about bravery in the context of business?
I mean, I think it. I mean, it comes in different ways. So, I mean, I think a lot of these were sort of things that when we started the company, things that like the values that we held and sort of held everyone else sort of accountable to, like the traits that we look for in other people, right? And so, brave is really about bravery is about um, being able to take risk, right? And having the personality to put yourself out there, take a risk, and it's okay to fail, right? um, and so a lot of it is when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a business, I mean you have to be brave or you're going to fail, right?
Right.
Or you're going to give up pretty quick, right?
Right.
So I mean, I think a lot of it, yeah, is about taking risks and not being afraid to try something new. Um,
Nice.
yeah.
Nice, man. So what's like sort of the whole backstory of Digital Operative? How did you guys get started? And
So, so I'm originally from the Boston area. I lived out here in San Diego for a couple years, and then I moved back to Boston, and my wife hated it there, so we ended up coming back to San Diego. And
did you
right
like
around
it
the
there?
time, did I
Boston?
like Boston? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain. I mean, the weather's the weather, right? I mean, in the
Quite a
summer
bit
it's
different from
hot
San
and
Diego.
humid, and in the summer it's cold and freezing, and
Yeah.
can be dreary and at times. She spent 10 years here in San Diego, and so she didn't
Couldn't
really like
hang.
it. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I miss, there's the family aspect, and it's good to be around family, but this is our home, and
Mm-hmm.
so so anyway, so I had done a bunch of stuff similar to what we were doing. I had started a little company, and it was me and one or two other people, and we were doing a lot of development, design, building websites and things like that. And then when we moved back to San Diego, decided that wanted to basically stop working from home and join a company. And I found this startup that BJ was the CMO at. And interestingly enough, he actually hired me on as I was running marketing and product development.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so we just kind of hit it off, and that was the summer of 2008. And right around the time the economy took a turn, the founder, who really had privately funded it, basically ran out of money, and given the state of the economy, there wasn't really any money to be had. So ended up shutting it down, and so we were, BJ had a 2-week old at the time, and
Wow.
we had to basically survive, right? So we started doing consulting out of my second bedroom, moved to a living room, hired our first employee, who's Danny, who's still with us today. So he actually worked in my living room, and then we moved into a like 700 square foot office. We had about 10, 12 people in there at one point, which was pretty tight. And then, just sort of have grown and evolved since. Um, so doing the same kind of thing, BJ's background's more on the design and marketing side. My background's more on the technology, but between the two of us, we've literally done a little bit of everything that we do today. Um, so yeah, I
Nice.
mean, in the early days, we did a lot of custom app development.
Yeah.
Um, did a lot of Zen framework stuff, and that's kind of how the transition sort of moved into Magento.
Right. Right. And you guys are like, what's the sort of the scale of Digital Operative now? You guys are an enterprise solutions partner, and you guys are
Um,
opening offices all over the place.
I think what's the one below enterprise?
Uh, prof, uh,
Professional.
professional. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're professional. Yeah, so we're about 50 people. Our headquarters is in San Diego. The majority of the team's there, and then we have an office in Denver. There's 6 people there, and then we've got a handful of people sort of spread out throughout the country. Um, really just acquired talent where we can find them. Um, and then our parent company is based in Japan, but they've got offices all over the world.
Hmm. So you mentioned your parent company, and you guys were acquired. Was it a couple years ago?
Yeah, so we took on a majority shareholder in December of 2016. So it's been about a year and a half or so.
Nice.
Yeah.
What what was that whole process like?
Um, it was. It was actually pretty straightforward. So we were doing work with them. So their business is more traditionally call center, business process outsourcing. And so they have an office in LA and one up in San Jose. And we were working with them on Sony Vaio. Well, it's not Sony, but the Sony Vaio brand with the laptops.
Yeah.
When Sony shut that down, they basically sold Vaio the rights to Vaio to a company in Japan, which, if there were 100 people in Japan, 98 of them were from the original Sony team.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had gone into a relationship with them to basically import the computers and be like the merchant of record and sell them here. And so we were helping with their marketing and their Magento site.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were working with them for a while, and then they approached us to have conversations about doing something a little more involved from a partnership perspective.
You're a
And
man
then
of few words. Do something a little more involved.
yeah,
Um,
so yeah, I mean, like the process in of itself was actually really quick and straightforward. So I mean, the office up in San Jose is sort of their investment arm, and they've got investments mostly around e-commerce. That's sort of their focus,
mhm.
um, and looking at as well as digital marketing, right? And so they see the United States, while Asia as a whole, the markets are much bigger. The United States is much more advanced from a technology and marketing perspective.
Mhm.
As well as e-commerce spending is per capita a lot higher, and so they see the United States as sort of like the innovation ground for what potentially could happen and will happen in those other countries.
Mm.
So it was an opportunity to say, okay, like how do we leverage some of this know-how and being able to scale that and grow that. Um, so we are now, you know, we are a small part of the team. I mean, there's almost 40,000 employees globally,
Oh
um,
wow.
but we're having some pretty involved in strategic conversations around both e-commerce and marketing and just being involved in some of the bigger picture stuff, which is it's really cool and interesting.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, and so we were just got back from Japan last week, and they do their annual strategy meeting. So I met with different folks around the world, and just hear what they're up to and things that they're working on, and yeah.
That's awesome. So the when you say their annual strategy meeting, this is just like a company wide meeting with all of the like a conference or something with all of the 30, you said 30,000 employees?
I think there's like almost 40,000. So the annual strategy meeting, so we technically are part of like this global division. And so there's a smaller, like little, couple hour meeting and dinner. I think there was 400 people from that team this year.
Mm.
And then the bigger meeting is, I think it's about 800 to 1,000 people. And that's everybody. And that's like literally a full day, like 9 to 6 of presentations, mostly in Japanese.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's hard to follow. I mean, you've got translators, but between like, them presenting what they're presenting loud in Japanese and then the person in English, and it's kind of hard to follow along.
Mhm. Mhm.
They'll be talking for like, 5 minutes, and then, the translation is like 6 words, and you're like, I'm not really sure that's real. That's everything that was said.
This is a very verbose culture.
Well, but I mean, it's interesting too, though. I mean, a lot of the marketing trends and words and things are in English, right? So, you look at the slides and it's just like digital transformation is all in English, right? It's like that's,
Right.
so you can kind of follow along.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah, I
cool. Do
mean,
you oh sorry, go ahead.
no, good.
I was gonna say, do you really like enjoy Japan. Like it's such a that's actually one of it's probably the top place on my list I'd like to travel to. Just such a kind of like unique culture, business wise and just in general. And do you really enjoy those trips out there and enjoy connecting with e-commerce folks out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. We kind of know our little area and spots where we stay, which is, Shibuya, which I don't know if you've ever.
Shibuya?
Shibuya, there's like this, this is the intersection that I think it's like 5 or 6 different like corners. And, if you've ever seen shots of like the scramble, it's basically like people walking across this giant intersection in all different ways. It's pretty famous, but
Oh, okay.
we know that area pretty well, just from being there, a bunch. But yeah, I mean between the food and the culture and it's definitely
Did you eat
different.
some bomb sushi over there?
Yeah, there's one place we
Oh,
went to
so
the
jealous.
last night. They had a tank and they literally would scoop the fish out and kill it and cut it like in the kitchen. You could see them
What?
from where you were sitting. Yeah.
That's wild.
But yeah, I mean, they've served, and I'm not the most adventurous eater. But there's all sorts of things, and I'll ask what some of the stuff is, and they're kind of like, I don't really know how to translate that into English, and
Hmm.
it's kind of like, oh, it's like sea cucumber, and it's kind of
All
like,
right.
oh, okay, I'll try it, but some of the
So
textures
cool.
are a little interesting.
Yeah. The have you seen the movie Euro Dreams of Sushi? It was on Netflix.
No.
It's about this guy named Euro who is a sushi guy. I think he has the most sort of in-demand sushi restaurant in the whole country. Like it's booked out, I think, for a year, 2 years in advance. And he just goes through like his whole backstory and how he, like picks fish and just the whole art of it. Like he's been doing it for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years. And when he hires people, they'll have to work for like 5, 6 years before they can even touch the rice. And then like 10 years before they can act. And just this whole, which seems to me like sort of more that Japanese culture of just like, I don't know if perfectionism is the word for it, but just this very, intense, like care for craftsmanship of making sushi. And, it was kind of inspiring for me too, just as a general thing of just like, caring about your craft and things like that and wanting to perfect your craft. Um,
Yeah, I mean, they take very much a long-term view of things too, right? It's not about the here and the now. Um, so, I mean, we obviously have short-term and long-term goals, but I mean, a lot of it, they're in it for the long haul, right? It's not like getting bought by a private equity company that wants to, chew you up and spit you out and make some sort of multiple. There's long-term.
Interesting that you mentioned that, Adam. Any particular private equity acquisitions come to mind at the moment?
Magento.
Well, I did want to get to that at some point. I think you segued us in very nicely. Um,
That's how I
by the way, I
roll.
sort of cut you off. Sorry about that, but
No, that's fine.
I was just going to get your thoughts on the whole thing, or if you wanted to finish up what you were saying before I so rudely interrupted you.
No, I mean, you ruined it for me, so I just can't go back.
The moment is gone.
Yeah, I mean, once you go to the Magento acquisition, like everything else just sort of fades away.
Yeah, yeah. So what are your
Um,
what are your thoughts on the whole thing?
I think, I mean, it's interesting because, I look at sort of the enterprise space, right? And I think it makes sense, right? Some of, obviously the more enterprise companies, the larger ones, look at, you know, who is behind these companies, right? Like they value that, right? It's like any of the big software companies, like, is their software better? Like, no, but they're just large, and there's some sort of
Lends
uh,
credibility.
yeah, there's just some sort of trust factor, and like, oh, okay, you've got X number of people, like, okay, then you can do business with us, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, it sounds like the biggest sentiment they're concerned is around what happens to community, because Adobe is not necessarily the biggest open source proponent. Although from what I've seen and heard, it sounds like there's not too much concern about that. But as a we don't really do too much community work. Um,
You're one of those evil corporate, evil enterprise people.
it's not called enterprise anymore. Come on
Oh,
now.
sorry, commerce.
um, no, I mean, and it's not like we won't do it. It just does it make sense or not, right? And so I think so. I think it lends it builds more credibility around that, right? When you can say, oh yeah, Magento, and they're owned and backed by Adobe, right? Like it's not going anywhere.
Hmm.
And I think that matters to the larger organizations. Obviously there's some integrations at the larger scale with things like Experience Manager, and um, we have clients that have really bought into the Adobe suite. We have one client that we've worked with now for this is the second company I think that we've worked with him. And the first thing he always does is he goes in and rips out analytics and puts in Adobe products, right? And so
Oh,
the
nice.
whole marketing suite. So you end up with the analytics product and test and target, and um, he's different people like that, because I forget what they call what's analytics. I'm drawing a blank on it
Oh,
now.
I think there's an Adobe Customer Analytics or something like that.
Well, it was
It
Omniture.
used to be Omniture, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, essentially those sort of products and that suite of products, right? So I think it makes sense.
Adobe Analytics Ultimate, Advanced Analytics and Machine Learning. Then there's Sensei, which is the machine learning AI deal.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't dove too far down the Adobe rabbit hole, but yeah, I mean, I think that assuming they don't ruin the brand and um, the community and the culture, I think it's a positive move,
Nice.
right?
I'm actually really interested to sort of to go a little bit more like in like the client of yours you mentioned that uses a lot of Adobe stuff and analytics, because I'm interested in talking to people that have direct experience with it. I haven't talked to too many people yet. Um, do you know any of the specific reasons that they prefer the Adobe Analytics over Google Analytics? Like any of the features there in any of the Adobe suite that that are interesting?
Yeah,
Haven't.
well, I don't know too much about it, but I would say that, so I mean, Test and Target is their testing platform, which competes with like Optimizely, right?
Oh, okay.
And so that he ends up usually using that because it sort of gets bundled in. You buy the suite, and you get that at discount, or comes all together. I don't remember, but
Right.
specifically with the Google Analytics, I mean, if you're using the free version, I mean, there's some limitations, right? Especially when you get up there in terms of enterprise and the amount of data. I mean, Google Analytics, the core is really supposed to be a trending platform, right? So the data is not 100% accurate, and if you want to go use,
It's all sampled.
yeah, so if you want the true enterprise sort of analytics platform, you're talking about Google. I don't know what they call it now. I think it's like 360 or something like that.
Mm.
And that's not cheap by any means.
Hmm.
I think it's probably more than Adobe is.
Wow.
So, but I mean, specifically to this client, he's just used it for a long time, and so
Right.
he knows it and trusts it, and that's the implementation that he likes and knows.
Right. Right.
So
Do they let you do like drill into individual because like one of the big limitations with Google Analytics is there's no personally identifiable information in there. Do they let you, whereas like one that I think of is KISSmetrics lets
Mhm.
you kind of drill into the individual If you want to drill into individual users, you can.
I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't used it. I haven't really played around with it that much, and we have an analyst here, so they're kind of more in the data side. But I would say that I think you can. I think it just depends on how you set it up and how you. A lot of it has to do with your implementation, right?
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
I think it has capability to do that, though.
Right. And then going back to what you said a little bit earlier is like you know, with things moving a little bit more in the enterprise direction, one of the things that seems interesting to me is that basically companies in the ecosystem like yours have sort of grown up along with Magento, because Magento has gone from, you know, the very open source SMB roots to like more mid-market, now enterprise. And companies like you know, like you guys do mostly enterprise builds now. And it's like all these companies in the ecosystem have grown up along with Magento. And this is sort of just another sort of step of growth in that direction. The companies that haven't necessarily had that same growth trajectory and are still at the SMB end of things are, you know, not like generally not as thrilled about some of these things. But it's cool. Like it's cool to see companies that have grown up along with Magento and are kind of experiencing the same type of success going up market.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to, you know, the earlier days and you know, when we were just, you know, 10, 12 people, right? And you know, unless you have the experience, you know, sort of working in that environment, it can sometimes be a challenge, right? There's just, you know, even just working with the company, like there's just a lot more bureaucracy and red tape, and even things like, you know, just getting contracts signed and getting, you know, invoices paid. You know, the timelines for those things are just. I mean, we just closed a deal with the company that we've been talking with for almost a year and a half, and
Wow.
you know, the process just to get through some of that stuff is ridiculous. But you know, I mean, the larger the company, the more control and the more leverage they have to say, okay, you know, dictate terms and price and you know, once you start dealing with procurement teams and things like that, you know, you enter a whole new different, you know, ball game, and it's if you're a small company and you have to deal with that, you know, it may not be viable from a business perspective, right? I mean, I remember in the, you know, in the early days when there was, you know, maybe just 5 of us, you know, we did work with a company that was owned by Comcast at the time, which was owned by GE. And we had finished all the work before we even signed the contract and before we even got paid. And the payment terms were like 120 days. And then they told us, oh, if you finance, you can go and you can finance your invoice through our parent company, GE, and get paid in 30 days, but they'll take a 3% cut. And I was just like, what? Right? So, I mean, you know, as a small
Like, could you
business,
guys just like pay me like the old fashioned way or something?
so, I mean, you know, as a small business, you know, it becomes increasingly more difficult for folks to, you know, for small businesses to deal with enterprises like that, right? I mean, you know, the larger the organization, we have organization, you know, we work with companies that, you know, their payment terms are net 90. Like, you know, in the early days when we were small, like that would have killed us. Right. I mean, it's just really hard to sustain that from a cash flow perspective and from a business perspective, unless you manage it really well, right? So
It's interesting because like with payment terms, like I did some freelance stuff back in the day, and you know, I've had enough experience with sort of chasing payments and stuff that I just never wanted to really have to deal with it again. And so, you know, with Mage Mail, everything was credit card based and stuff like that. And it was great. And then now with Commerce Hero, I try to drive everybody to credit cards. Basically, everybody's on credit cards, but it's tough because I also want to get access, particularly on the merchant side, of like merchants that hire in-house tend to be a bit larger. And so then when I tell them to put a credit card on file, they're like, what? They're like, we need
It's not
you,
going to
like,
happen.
we're going to invoice you. And so I'm struggling with that because, you know, I'm a small operation. So I don't really like need the business. I mean, I'd like it, but I'm kind of just like, I'd rather not deal with it. And at the same time, I do want to tap into that market better. So I struggle with that a little bit, but I just don't ever want to have to deal with chasing payments again. It's no fun.
Yeah. One of the many hats that I've worn over the years is the accounting hat. So, which was the first person that we hired after, after we got, after we took on an investment. So I can say that I don't have to deal with that anymore, but no stranger to having to chase down people, and
Right.
the squeaky wheel gets the grease is really what it comes down to, right? Um,
If you got to stab somebody, hey, you got to
I mean,
do what
it's
you got to
funny
do.
because not that I ever stabbed anyone, but I can tell you some stories that it just blow your mind, of things that happened, including someone ending up in jail and me talking to their investor, and
Do tell.
yeah.
This is the time.
And I used to bring donuts to one of the accounting departments for one of our bigger clients, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we got your check. It's right here." I'm like, "Yeah,
That's slick. That's
yeah." So
slick.
there's all sorts of tricks, But
You're a
again, that was,
you're a clever dude.
yeah. It's all about relationships, right? So
Yeah. Well, so, but you gotta, what's the story now where you said, I didn't ever stab anybody, but what's the,
we had this one client who was just he was a very interesting character, and he would always give us the runaround about any and everything. And towards the end, we had a relationship with someone that was funding him, and so we kind of knew the backstory of what was going on. So I knew that the things that we were being told were essentially a bunch of crap.
bunch of hoo-ha.
Yeah, but yeah, but he did end up in jail at one point. Not related to us.
Wow, man, you got an interesting client base there.
Well, that's why I say is like, I mean, like I said, I've done a little bit of everything, right? So, I mean, I've managed clients since the beginning of the company. And so, there's pretty much not anything that I haven't seen, or had to deal with. Right. So,
Right.
um, it doesn't really phase me anymore. People don't phase me anymore. It's just, it's surprising, but it just kind of comes with the territory, right? So,
Right, right. Do you guys have as far as like your client base goes? Do you guys have any particular niches? I think we've talked about like outdoor brands and stuff like that. Do you guys have any particular niches or types of clients that you
yeah.
tend
So,
to work with?
outdoor lifestyle, active brands. They tend to be more brands than sort of, stores per se, right? I think of it as more like, Apple versus Amazon. Most of our clients are trying to tell a brand story, and their brand is just as important as selling product. So we're doing stuff in, fashion and apparel, like luxury goods, consumer electronics, outdoor kind of stuff. So some
Nice,
jewelry, skate, surf, snowboard kind of stuff too.
nice. Mostly B2C type stuff.
Yeah, we're doing some B2B as well. Um, we've got I think two or three B2B projects that we've been working on.
Nice.
So
How's that going?
good. I mean, it's got its own set of nuances and challenges, and a lot of it stems around just customer data, or not customer data, but like client data, right? So, um, especially when you're a big organization and you're doing B2B, lots of times you've got, historical things set up. So, pricing, we had one client that had 10,000 different price tiers based on, essentially every client had their own pricing book. Right.
Wow.
And so, it's like, how do you translate that into something that you can actually like use? So part of it is, data cleanup, and they have to do a bunch of work on that end. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that, B2B can be more interesting than what people make it out to be, right?
Mhm.
Trying to think of ways like how can you bring the B2C mentality and experience to a B2B experience, right? How do you make B2B sexy?
Right. And so how do you make it sexy?
Um, I think I mean, especially now as, you think about, millennials and how they interact from an e-commerce perspective. Those are starting to be the people that are, interacting and want B2B, right? So I think it's just, I mean, it's the same things you do for B2C is you focus on the user experience and understanding what, who the customer is and where the friction points are, and, present it in a way that makes it easy and intuitive for them, and interesting, and, take some of the marketing playbooks from, the B2C and find ways to keep folks engaged and, create content and basically, help them, be easier, make the job easier for them, if they need to place orders and reorders and have those lines of communication in a more digital fashion, right? Some of these B2B companies are still taking phone orders and fax orders and,
Mhm,
just
mhm.
archaic means that just don't scale.
Right, right.
So,
Have you guys played around with Magento's B2B offering yet?
yeah. Yeah, I think we've got actually I'm trying to think. We launched one right around the time that maybe a couple months before it launched. And so I think we had built a bunch of the functionality that we needed and or used third-party modules. And then I think we're in the process of sort of stripping some of that out and replacing it with native B2B functionality.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
Gotcha. Um, what does your day to day look like personally? Like you mentioned, you've worn many hats and things like that, and got a lot of people to do different things and stuff like that. What do you spend your time on?
I kind of straddle technology and um, like operations project management. So I'm involved in a lot of, more on the technical consulting side, right? So, my kind of thing is around working with clients to help them leverage technology to grow their business, right? And so I'm helping to do some of the, strategic consulting around, what technologies they should use, how things should be implemented. It's basically like architecting solutions. But then also, working to make sure that, our teams are getting the things that they need from, a project delivery standpoint. A lot of the stuff that we've been doing, the last 6 months, because essentially, over the last year, we've doubled in size.
Wow.
And so, a lot of what we've been doing is really just creating processes and procedures around things to help us scale better. So we're in the process right now of replacing, our project management system, and our time tracking system and our resourcing system. And then with that comes client communication systems. And so, pretty much the core of, how we run the business is being sort of retooled at the current moment. Um, and so with that, you've got a lot of different people involved in that process. And so, it's basically helped steer that ship in terms of, making the decisions that align with, how we want to operate and what we need to
Hmm.
do.
Nice. What are
And
you
then
guys?
occasionally answering random pager duty calls to help solve infrastructure issues and workarounds. I don't do much Magento development. I know enough about it, and I'm in it to basically help solve problems by understanding what the business needs are and how the technology works. And so a lot of it's just like, hey, have you tried this and thought about it this way? And they're like, no. And like, okay, that worked, thanks, right? And I don't necessarily have to be in the Magento code all day, to be able to do that.
Yeah. What you mentioned you're replacing your PM and time tracking systems. I'm curious, like what you're moving from and what you're moving to, if that's something you could share.
Yeah. So right now we have, for time tracking, we use Harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And then for forecasting, we use Forecast, which is sort of the brother sister of Harvest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those sort of tie together. Our task management and client communications are all in Active Collab.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's time tracking, task management, communications, resourcing. So all of those are being merged into Maven.
Oh, I've never heard of that. Must be very very enterprisey solution.
It's not cheap, but it will. I mean, so we've kind of separated it out, and so like Maven will handle task tracking. It handles project management. It handles resource management and handles a lot of the operations side of things, right? So
Mhm.
it's sort of I think of it from like a top down, bottom up perspective, in the sense that, when you put tasks in, you can estimate them, and then you can actually resource people based on the individual tasks that need to get performed. And so that
Mhm.
sort of produces, a body of work that someone has to do. And then they track time against that system. And then so that allows us to do forecasting. It allows us to do resourcing against like actual work. And then we can pull all those reports based on all that information. And that can
Mhm.
feed back into accounting and whatever else. And then I've built another system that sort of sits on top of that, that's handling client communication. And so that's more about, basically just like threaded discussions. And that
Okay.
that all that I built in Laravel.
Oh, nice. Um, so why it's interesting that like you're sort of um building or you're sort of moving to like an all-in-one um solution with Maven, but then you built your own client communication piece on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of came to the realization that having clients in our task management wasn't necessarily the best thing. And so, like, while we do operate very transparently, um, the challenge that we have is right now our workflow is clients can't create tasks, but they can create discussions, and those discussions get turned into tasks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So within Maven, it has everything except for like the ability to create those sort of discussions. And so that's what this does. And then later on, we can define how we want to integrate the two, so that you could basically convert a discussion back into an individual task.
Nice.
So
That's awesome. Um, as you were talking about building that thing in Laravel, I remember I was reminded of Order Monitor, which I didn't have on my list, so I just added it. So Order Monitor is a SaaS, basically a SaaS product that you built. Did you build it yourself personally?
yeah. So yeah, so that came out, I mean, if you kind of think back, we've kind of always been product minded. Um, I'm a tinkerer, an entrepreneur at heart, like to build things, right? So it came out of a necessity from, we had a client that had an issue with, I don't even remember what it was, but um, essentially there was something wrong with their site, and orders weren't coming through, but no one raised a flag because like people were picking up the phone and ordering. And so like their sales numbers weren't drastically out of sorts. And so I think it took, several hours before someone figured it out. And so then they said, well, how come we're not like monitoring the throughput of, our Magento site? I'm like, well, how do you do that, right? Google Analytics isn't terribly accurate. And then even then, like, how do you trigger an alert? And so that's kind of where it got born from. And so, built out this module that basically collects aggregate order data and then allows you to create alerts based on sort of KPIs and thresholds, right? So if orders are above a certain amount or below a certain amount, it can send you an alert. The other one that we've seen time and again is, people screwing up coupon codes, right? They've given, crazy discounts because someone set it up because it set it up wrong, right? And so that this would detect that, right? It would say, if the orders are discounted more than a certain percent, because we know we're not going to give anyone a 50% discount, then like send an alert. Or if more than, if 50% of the order, if like 100% of all the orders are discounted and we're not even running a promo, then we know someone screwed something up.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of stuff, that's kind of where it got built out. And, I've over the years sort of shifted, my mentality around what these things are in terms of like products, right? I don't really consider them products. I consider them more like apps, right? Because, being an agency, despite the fact that everyone wants to build products and it's cool, it's, essentially not the core of our business. And so it's very difficult to build an app, market an app, sell it, as you probably know, right? Especially when it's not, your core focus, right? And so, these things are complementary to the services that we offer, or value adds, or things like that. And despite, my hopes and dreams, they don't necessarily go, don't necessarily, it's not the, and I learned this from, working with a lot of entrepreneurs and the custom apps, is like, this stuff isn't the field of dreams. Like, you don't just build it and they come.
Yeah. Where did they get that anyways, man?
What?
The build it and they'll build it and they'll come. It's like it's so the opposite of reality.
No, I know. And so, it's like I've got notebooks of ideas of things that just never, saw the light of day. And it's just, so that's why, a lot of the stuff that we do that are sort of apps, are things that I'm doing just to sort of scratch my itch, and because I like to build stuff. And so I'm typically doing it in my spare time. Or, as needed to solve some sort of need, both for our client or either for the client or internally. And I think that, taking that approach, that's sort of been a smart way of approach. And we had another app that we've since sort of sunsetted, that, had a decent amount of traction. It was a contest and sweepstakes app that we'd built, that was sort of an iteration of something we'd built in the early days for a client. And all the product development was essentially funded by, feature requests. The client would come in, a new client would come in and say, "Hey, can it do this?" And you're like, sure. And then we'd go and we'd build it, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to building all these functionality and trying to sell it. And so that's sort of been the approach. And, that's sort of worked out because it doesn't require, huge investment of time and resources unless you can really essentially justify it from a business perspective.
Yeah. No, that's a smart way to approach it, is like, listen, there are gaps to fill in terms of functionality, and you can offer those to, existing clients, or maybe even that can become lead gen for you to potentially new clients that use it. But to sort of be realistic about the fact that you're probably not gonna go full steam on it as a product company, since it's sort of outside of your core business.
Yeah. Or, and just making sure that that stuff complements what we're doing, right? So like, so that it has a place, right? Because there's all sorts of, ideas that, we see a need, and it's like, well, is this bigger than just a one-off, and does this provide a need, for us or for our clients, that we can, do something with that justifies that time, and from a resource perspective. And then, ultimately, we've always said, if anything sort of magically took off for one reason or another, that we'd invest, the time and the resources into it. But again, it's, running an agency is more than a full-time job, and trying to grow that and focus there is enough work for everyone here. So
Right. Right. Um, with Order Monitor and that functionality, is there have you guys played with Magento's Order Manager product at all? And is there any kind of overlap in the functionality or like potential for integration?
I wouldn't say on the order management side. I would say it'd be more so on the Magento business intelligence side.
Okay.
Because essentially because we had all this data, started building out some dashboards and things, and they're super lightweight. And so at Imagine, actually, I was talking to one of the people at Magento BI and was asking about some of the stuff, and they were saying that one of the things that was requested a lot was the ability to have alerts based on data points.
Oh, nice.
And so it sounded like it was something that they were working on. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
again, it hasn't been a huge focus.
Hmm. Is it possible to build on top of Order Manager or build plugins or?
I mean, they have APIs and stuff, so I would imagine you
Okay,
can do stuff.
that's cool. Um, you talked about forecasting as an agency, which is interesting. I've talked to a few different agencies that have that as a pain point. And you talked about how you're moving to a new system to sort of improve the forecasting you're able to do.
Mhm.
Um, how how well are you guys able to forecast work, and how important is that to your business?
I mean, there's two different sides of forecasting. There's forecasting from like a resource perspective, and then there's forecasting from well, I mean, there's more than that. So there's forecasting, resourcing. There's forecasting cash flow. There's forecasting revenue.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's sort of a fine line between forecasting and projections and things like that. So I would say that it's getting better. It's always a challenge. There's a lot of ebb and flow in terms of if a new big project lands, tomorrow, obviously there becomes a need. I would say that it is not as volatile as it may have been in the early days. A lot of our clients are on, ongoing retainers, and we're working with them on a long-term basis. So we can generally forecast the majority of the work because it's just an ongoing stream of things that we're working on, right?
Hmm.
um, we don't just churn out a lot of sites and then move on to the next. Most of our clients we work with for a number of years and just continue to support their growth,
Hmm.
both on the technology side and the marketing side. So I would say that it depends on what it is. I would say that from a forecasting perspective, it's more challenging on a micro level than it is on a macro level, because there's a lot of ebbs and flows on a day-to-day basis in terms of changing priorities and clients having new requests for small things, and potentially issues arise, or there's some big promotion, and that creates a spike in activity and things like that. So um, I would say that that having more consistent retainer based work has made it easier to do forecasting.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. It's something that is interesting to me. I have thought a little bit about forecasting type stuff, um it seems to me that you're probably ahead of most agencies that are in a similar space to you, 50 and 50 or under employees, where I think a lot of agencies of that size are mostly sort of just doing it on a gut feel as far as forecasting goes, or really just if you're doing retainer work, you kind of have your forecasting is sort of done for you out of the box a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the nature of the work. But like for like forecasting like non-retainer work, in a way that, you know, you just look at a dashboard and just see everything that's going on and know everything that's going on. I don't know if anybody's quite there yet. It'd be interesting to see though, if, you
I
know.
mean, we're trying to get there, and that's what Mavenlink, does, right? I mean, part of the challenge with the tools that we have now is that a lot of it's driven by, I wouldn't necessarily like gut feel, but it's driven by, just a general sense of like where things are at, right? And
Like you
so,
look at a few numbers, not total gut feel, but like you look at a couple numbers, you're like, okay, I think we're good. Sort
well,
of
I mean, it's,
roughly.
some of it's based on trends, right? So it's okay, how many hours are we trending this month for client A versus client B? And, we're supposed to be 50% of the way done on project X. Are we 50%? Are we 40%? Are we 10%? Are we 60%, right? And so based on that, you can kind of predict, okay, well, what do I have to move around, right? Or what does that look like? When do we expect those things to be done? And so like we have other meetings that sort of dovetail into some of that, which is, looking at like, project burn rates, right? So looking at, how we're using time, how we're relative to, either A, a retainer, or B, a project, so that we can, look at, how we're trending for the month, right? And how we're trending for a project over, a period of time. So I wouldn't say that it's going to be 100% that, we just push a button, now comes a magical report. Um, but it will allow us to have all the information in one place, and be able to manage it at a much more granular level, right? Because right now, the way that, if you look at harvest and forecast, those as tools, you're basically allocating people's time based on projects, right? And so the challenge with that is that, you have to do estimates around what things are, and they're not tied to individual tasks. And so if a task takes more time or less time, then um, that has to shift the forecasting numbers, right? And so,
Hmm. Hmm.
a perfect example that happens all the time is client says, hey, here's a project that we want to start on, Tuesday, and we budget someone to work on it, Tuesday through Friday, and then the client doesn't give us the information that we need until Thursday,
Right.
right? And so then you have to go in and shift all that stuff. And so and so then, someone comes in and says, okay, what am I supposed to be working on? And it's like, well, you were booked for this amount of time, but that project didn't actually, the client didn't deliver what they said they were going to do, so now we're delayed a day or two, right? And so there's just, there's constant ebbs and flows with that. And I think the more information you can have, and the closer that you can manage it and monitor it, just makes it that much easier to be able to adapt on the fly.
Hmm. What and then what are your thoughts on just in general fixed bid estimate type work versus
Hate it.
retainer work? Um, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, yeah, I can hear you. um, yeah. So
I
like,
mean, I
what
would
what?
take I mean, for me, like a fixed bid is just the entryway to getting the retainer,
Right.
right? Um, the challenge with fixed bids is that you never know. There's always a bunch of unknowns, right? And the question then becomes like, well, whose responsibility is that for things uncovered along the way, right? And we're not one of those companies that believes in surprising people and change ordering the hell out of them. Um, but also at the same time, we're not going to just, do something for free. So it's really just finding a balance, right? And I think that if you build trust and a solid relationship with your clients, that the things that are clearly outside of scope, like they're outside of scope, like there's not a lot of contention around negotiating those things, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we're working on now too, in conjunction with all this other stuff, is, refining the estimation and the statements of work, and what those things look like. And so within that is clear definition of like, here are the things that we're going to do, here are the assumptions that are around that, right? And so I mean, a good example is like, takes something like data migration, right? You say we're going to migrate customer history or order history, right? and then you're making an assumption that we're going to do it using this tool and in this fashion, and these are the things that are going to get moved over. And so if something deviates from that, it's pretty clear that, like, either A, they changed something, or B, there was something that wasn't known at the time, right?
Yeah.
And so then it just makes it easier to have that conversation, say, hey, like, this is fundamentally different for these reasons, and so it's going to take more time. And it just makes that conversation easier, instead of just trying to nickel and dime everybody. And yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that you said straight up fixed bid is basically the entry to retainer, because I had that same exact thought, but like, because I talk to people that are, very much like all we do is retainer. And then I talk to people that are like, listen, I don't have clients coming to me with a blank check. Like, they always want, to sort of have know what they're paying, what they're going to get. And then the common thing I hear is this kind of things like, well, after the initial fixed bid, then ideally we kind of move into a retainer once the trust is built. And so then it's almost like, really, what you want to get at is that trust. And if for whatever reason the referral they came in on, or the way they know you, if the trust is there from the beginning, maybe there's less of a need to sort of jump through the hoops of that fixed bid estimate, because like you said, there's no such thing like as a fixed bid estimate where everybody knows all the variables and nothing's going to change. Things are always going to change, and there's always going to be unknowns, and there's always going to be that negotiation process, and having things on a pure retainer kind of makes that explicit.
Sometimes it's a
Whereas,
hybrid too, right? Like, where
yeah,
there's a fixed bid on, like, what's known. Like, it's not uncommon, which is sometimes surprising for me, but they say, okay, we want to build a Magento site and we're going to do an ERP integration, but we don't know how the ERP is going to integrate, and we may switch our ERP. And so, like, can you give us an estimate on that? I'm like, okay, well, it could be this big, or it could
be a
be like
lot.
this big, right? So it'd be like, okay, well, we'll give you a fixed bid on what we know, and then maybe we'll put a bucket of hours against the ERP, and then we can sort of revisit it and estimate it once we go through a discovery process or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's just about, again, it's just outlining what you know and what you don't know, right? And making assumptions against that, and making sure that those are accurate and people understand what their role is in terms of understanding how to better define that. And then, again, just setting clear expectations, because then you can have those conversations a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, if the relationship is strong and the client is reasonable, they're a good client, like, like you said, those conversations won't be so contentious. When they are really contentious, things probably aren't going to work out so well. Like, once you get to that point where, maybe things can improve, but once you get to that point where trust is a little shaky, things are contentious, that's when, regardless of what's on paper, like, you're probably gonna have some issues.
Yeah.
And
There's always difficult clients, right? And so, again, it's just a matter of finding common ground. And
yeah,
if you're not willing to compromise, then that in and of itself is an issue, right? So,
right.
and I think that if your primary goal is to, like, churn out projects and then move on to the next, then, like, you're not willing to compromise because you don't care if the relationship stays intact.
Right.
Whereas, there's plenty of agencies that, and I always use this analogy, but there's plenty of agencies that, they go out and they find the juiciest, ripest piece of fruit and squeeze every last ounce of juice out of it, right? And we're looking more for something that needs to ripen over time, and that can, essentially be a seed that we can plant and grow our own tree and grow more fruit from.
Yeah.
And so, if you don't care about pissing off the client that you want to squeeze every ounce of juice out of, because you're going to throw them out when you're done with them. Right. And that's not in our DNA.
Yeah. It's a great analogy. What do you think about sort of the agency landscape just as a whole? Like, you guys were acquired or got a majority shareholder. involved. There's been a lot of consolidation in the space generally, obviously with Adobe acquiring Magento, that might shift some dynamics in the agency landscape. But how do you see things overall?
I mean, I don't think it's anything new. I think, as it pertains to sort of the e-commerce, SI, focused companies, I think it just demonstrates maturity in the marketplace. Um, you know, Larger organizations are seeing the need and the desire for e-commerce and these platforms, and so they're getting involved in it, right? I mean, you look back a number of years, and it's who were the players in the space, right? Um, you've got smaller platforms and SaaS-based platforms that are still competing in the SMB space, and then slowly trying to make their way up the food chain. And the same thing happens with agencies, right? I mean, you get to a certain size, and the next logical step is M&A. You start looking at how do we grow? Well, you can try and grow organically, or you can go acquire another company and grow much faster.
Mm-hmm.
And look for look for those opportunities where you can cross sell services, right? So and the Adobe one for me is a little. I don't know enough about Adobe's sort of like enterprise space outside of like maybe Experience Manager, where it makes sense. Whereas like Salesforce and Demandware sort of to me made a little bit more sense, because it allows them to basically cross sell. They can now offer commerce solutions to their huge array of business customers, right? And the same thing rings true for Adobe. Um, it may not be as big of a marketplace though, but I think the long term it makes sense. I mean, e-commerce isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and if you don't have a dog in that fight, eventually you're gonna either get passed by, or have to sort of catch up. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the same thing happens with agencies. There's a natural growth. The small guys the small companies that come out of the entrepreneurs that want to run a business or start an agency, like that's not going to go away anytime soon. And some of them are going to mature and grow and become larger and go down that path, and others are just going to be a lifestyle business and service the small businesses. I mean, you look at some of the other platforms, and that's really who they're targeting.
Right.
So,
actually, speaking of other platforms, do you guys work with any other e-commerce platforms other than Magento? And what's kind of been your, if so, what's been your experience? What do you think are the strengths and the weaknesses for different purposes?
Sure. Yeah, we do some work with Shopify Plus. I think it makes sense for some of the smaller merchants that are really more marketing and sales focused, and have smaller teams and don't need the overhead and complexity. It becomes a challenge when you start getting into things like multi-site, multi-language, complex catalogs, complex discounting. Those are generally the things where we've had a bunch of clients that are like, yeah, we'd really like to use Shopify, but we just can't because it just doesn't. Functionality is not there, right?
What do you think about the recent release they had of multi? I don't know if it was full on multi store, but multi currency,
I think it's just
multi.
yeah. I mean, it's just the first step. I mean, because it essentially is multi-currency, multi-language.
Right. I think that was it.
And I think multi-language is more so around supporting other languages in the admin.
Mm.
I haven't sort of fully debriefed on all that stuff, but yeah, I mean, I think that's the first step in that sort of path. But again, I think it's hard to compete with Magento on that because it's all there native, and multiple languages and currencies and sites have their own nuances and challenges in of themselves, let alone trying to retrofit that for a platform that doesn't natively support it. So those are some of the challenges. But again, I mean, like anything else, I think of the technology from the perspective of like what need does it solve, right? And what's the right tool for the job?
Yeah.
Um, never been looked at something and said, oh, if you're a carpenter, everything looks like a nail to you, right? And that's not really the approach that I've taken. So
Yeah. So mainly Shopify Plus, being the other platform that you guys work with from time to time.
yeah, we have a little bit of experience with Demandware here and there. I wouldn't say that we've done like a full implementation, but
Right.
have helped implement some stuff for some clients over the years.
Right. What do you guys tend to use around content management type stuff? You guys have a lot of B2C brands, so I'd imagine content is kind of key. Have you guys started to look at Magento's, the Bluefoot stuff that's been acquired, page builder stuff? What do your clients tend to like?
Yeah, we've used the page builder Bluefoot stuff for a couple clients. It depends on what it is. Some of them don't have a lot of content. They more have like complex content, if that makes sense. In the sense that, they've got more marketing, landing page, creative kind of things rather than just, pages and pages of content. The majority of it, I would say, is probably still in Magento. Well, a lot of folks are using WordPress as well for like a blog. So we've done, a number of different integrations there. Back in the Magento 1 days, we had a client that had Expression Engine as a front end. With Magento, I wouldn't say Magento was a back end, but it was integrated. We integrated the two together, which was a pain in the butt to manage. But so yeah, I mean that's kind of been the general approach, the hybrid.
Gotcha. I've heard that Adobe's content manager is really nice. I've heard that's
I
one
haven't
of
had
the
much experience with it, but yes, I mean over the years, I've done a lot with content management, so pretty familiar with sort of the general set of feature sets. I haven't looked at Adobe, but yeah, I mean, when you have a lot of content and you have a lot of different teams and multiple languages and you need to build out workflows and things like that, I mean, WordPress is just garbage at that, right? And, the next closest thing from a PHP perspective ends up being Drupal, and that's another conversation altogether. So, but I mean, yeah, I mean, some of the bigger enterprise, for some of the bigger enterprise customers, experience managers has come up as a topic of conversation. So it's interesting. They actually, the one of the teams in Japan does a lot with experience manager. They manage one of the airlines. I forget which one, but I think they have like 60,000 pages of content or something that they manage in experience manager.
Wow.
Yeah.
That works pretty well for him.
Yeah, as far as I know.
Nice.
I don't know too much about it, but
right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with all this stuff around content management. I was curious. I gave myself a note because we were talking about Japan and how you were saying that they're investing in the U.S. because there's more innovation around e-commerce in the U.S. and there's more consumer spend, which was interesting to me because I always think of like how Japan, in terms of technology, aren't they like always ahead, like several years ahead of the U.S. in terms of like smartphone technology, and even like trends like emojis? I think they were way ahead of us. It was interesting to me that they're not that they would lag behind us in terms of
do you
e-commerce.
buy a lot of stuff with emojis?
I do not.
I would say that like the e-commerce platforms in Japan for the Japanese market are not terribly sophisticated. There's a couple SaaS ones. I forget what they're called. There's one called EC Cube, which is kind of like Japanese Magento. It's PHP. There's an open source version of it. That's probably the most common, but from a feature set and functionality perspective, it's kind of probably more akin to, your OS Commerce Zencart kind of thing.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Or maybe a WooCommerce is probably a better analogy for it. I don't know. I haven't really done too much with it, other than I've heard that it's not the best, but it's not terrible. But I mean, part of it too is, a lot of what we've helped do is, help bring Japanese brands to the United States and sell in that market, and, sort of vice versa, right? So, from a technology perspective, I wouldn't say that they're behind. It's just they're doing things differently, right? The mode of how they're interacting with these things hasn't caught up. They use Line, which is kind of their communicator. It's kind of
The
like,
messaging app that they
yeah,
use.
a lot of stuff gets done through that. A lot of e-commerce gets transacted through that. It's kind of like WeChat in China.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the Japanese market in of itself is just a tough market to enter, right? I mean, it's very much an in-person culture, and they want you to be in country and part of it. And it's not easy for companies just to enter there, right? I mean, a lot of the parent company Transcosmos, I mean, a lot of the things like Salesforce and Adobe, and they've done joint ventures and partnerships with those companies to help bring that stuff to Japan, right? So it really takes someone being in country to sort of crack that nut. So
Yeah. And like that's interesting, just to hear more about the market in Japan, and also kind of the Magento community out there. It seems like there's a lot of opportunity for growth in the Magento community out there. I think of the is it VarightWorks, I think, is the name of the company, where Hirokazu, I can't remember his last name, is one of the Magento masters,
Mhm.
in the Magento Masters program, and it seems like he's doing a lot of interesting stuff out there. But yeah, so what are your thoughts on just the Magento community out there in general?
It is in its infancy. I spoke to at Imagine. We spoke to a couple of folks that sort of manage that territory, and they basically reiterated the fact that for Magento to sort of break into that, it's going to require Magento investing from both a sales and marketing perspective in country, right, and having someone there.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the first wave. If we were just to try and put a stake in the ground and say, hey, we're going to do Magento here, without that support from Magento, I think it historically hasn't gone very well.
Mm-hmm.
So, they see the Japanese market as an opportunity. And so, I think last I heard, this year they were intending to make some investments in that. So, hopefully it grows, and we can, we can help build a bigger presence in Japan. And yeah, there's lots of interesting nuances around, e-commerce in Japan, in terms of just nuances around, storing of emails, and the character set's different. And so you've got like double byte characters, and those things get handled differently. And so it's not as straightforward as you might think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Last name, first name, or switched, and things like that. So, and I think Magento supports that. And I think that, the master, I forget you just mentioned it, but I forget his name. I think they've produced, stuff that handles some of that stuff, but even so, it's it's still, there's still nuances around it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do they? As you mentioned emails, and I was thinking about GDPR and privacy and stuff like that. How does two-parter? How does Japan tend to operate in terms of like privacy, levels of privacy, like within the context of the type of stuff that's happening with GDPR? And then also like what are your thoughts on GDPR altogether? Like how's that? Is that starting to impact you guys and your clients?
So I mean, one of the interesting things I learned about Japan is that you can't really use people's emails unless they like create an account.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think after you fulfill the order, you're technically supposed to like delete the email address.
Oh, wow.
Um, but even so, I don't know that email is as popular in Japan as it is, here, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, I don't know that people are actively using email the same way that they are in the States. Um,
They're using mobile phones and messaging apps and stuff like
yeah,
that.
more, everything's done through line. As it pertains to GDPR, I mean, yeah, we're actively looking at it. We have a couple clients that have presence in the UK, and we're helping to launch there as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's definitely a topic of conversation. There is an office of Transcosmos in the UK, and so they're involved in it as well. So it's kind of been uh, everyone's been involved in terms of making sure that the things that we're doing are compliant and our clients are are where they need to be in terms of complying with regulations and things like that. So um, I mean, as it pertains to like how do I feel about it in general,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have mixed emotions. I mean, I think uh,
As any red-blooded American would.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's yes, it's
Have you seen like all these like there's services that are just like not off like they just throw an error message to all of Europe like we don't offer service in Europe and like I don't know if it's a Washington Post or this one newspaper that's charging they added a new price tier for people in Europe where there's no advertising or there's no link there's no JavaScript tracking type embeds or anything like that. It's interesting to see some of these sort of unintended
yeah. I
consequences.
don't understand how some of this stuff is really even feasible. I mean, conceptually, I think I agree. Yes, like you probably as an individual should own your own data and have the ability to sort of remove it, but to what end, right? I mean, I don't even know how this would work, but like, you came to me and said, you have to remove all of my personal information or any data you have about me. Like, how do I even identify you in my like analytics,
Hmm.
right? And like, if I remove you, how does that impact historical data and your
Mm.
reporting and all those things, right? And
Yeah.
I think, as much as it tries to be black and white, there's a lot of shades of gray in there, right? And so, um, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just going to take time will tell in terms of how it actually gets enforced and interpreted. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be prepared for it,
Yeah.
and you do everything to the best of your ability to you know comply. I think it's just a matter of what is feasible from a business perspective, and um, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of hype about it now, but I mean, the same thing could go for PCI compliance, right? Like, how many merchants actually go through the process,
Yeah.
right? Or complete the surveys, or do their freaking security patches, right, when they're
Yeah.
supposed to, right? So, um, I mean,
Nobody knows exactly how it's going to shake out. I mean,
yeah,
remains to be seen. Um, so we were talking a little bit before we started recording about blockchain.
yep,
So you've been dabbling in a little bit in blockchain stuff.
yeah. Been I mean, we've been involved. I wouldn't say involved, but interested. Probably got interested in it probably back in 2014. I want to say. Um, just interested in both from a technical perspective and just what the impact is from a socioeconomic point of view, and just trying to think about how does blockchain technology as a whole impact potentially e-commerce, right?
Hmm.
what are the applications of it? Obviously outside of, your sort of your traditional payments, right? And I think it's interesting, and I haven't really seen anyone do anything. Really seen anyone do anything with it yet. But I think that it could definitely solve a bunch of problems in the e-commerce space, ranging from, things like fraud prevention and, I mean, obviously payments is a big thing in and of itself, but that just, a lot of it just comes down to mass adoption, right? And
Mm-hmm.
as more people get, familiar with it and comfortable with it, and it becomes more widely adopted, I think that's where it's, it starts to take off. I mean, a lot of the implementations around, payments in terms of, being able to check out and pay, using Bitcoin or whatever. I think, part of the challenge is just the flow of it is different than what a traditional e-commerce checkout flow is. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that when someone starts to adapt the user experience around that, that's where it will start to take off. But I mean, the reality is, like anything else, it's still very much in its infancy, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these things that exist out there now are sort of like the base layer, right? I mean, you think about the base layer of the internet, it's like no one's talking about like TCP/IP and HTTP protocols. Like they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about the things that are built on top of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the stuff that exists now is really that base layer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, once that has matured to a state where people can, reliably build things on top of it in a consistent and uh, scalable manner, then I think that, it's just going to take time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you were saying that you're mining some Ethereum.
Ether, yeah, have been for a while.
So Ether is
Ether's the token for Ethereum, essentially.
Ethereum is the.
Ethereum's like the technology platform layer,
Oh, okay, 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 okay.
and Ether's like, the token.
So with Bitcoin, they're both the same. Bitcoin is the thing and the currency, but with Ethereum, Ethereum's the thing and Ether is the current the.
The
I
token.
don't know anything about all this stuff, man.
It's
But
super complicated. I mean, I read a lot about it, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and it's very complicated, right? And I think that's part of the challenge, right? Is that you kind of have to understand it to even do something with it now, and the general public just is beyond, it's beyond them, right? I mean, the closest thing, that people know how to interact with is Coinbase, right? And that's sort of like the PayPal of the space. But even
right.
then, who really understands exactly what they're doing, and how they're using it, and just something simple like the flow of it, right? Like, have you ever tried to check out with Bitcoin or to look to that, what that user experience is?
Not really, no.
Yeah, I mean, it's more akin to cash, right? Which is like, you think about a credit card, is I give you my credit card number, you charge me, right? And so me as a consumer, you're pulling money from me, right? Whereas with cryptocurrency, I'm pushing money to you,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about it more like cash. If you say, you owe me $20, you're not going to reach into my wallet and pull out the $20. I'm going to have to hand it to
Mm-hmm.
you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
think about the flow on an e-commerce site, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, you want to check out with Bitcoin? Here's my address. Go send me the money. You got 5 minutes to do that. Then you got to log in. You put the thing in. You put the
That's
address in. You send the
ridiculous.
money, and then it receives it, and then it completes the transaction.
But if you
And
use
so,
like if there's like a Coinbase plugin, then it's just like you just like auth and then it just takes it, right? It's more like a
yeah, it ends up being more like a PayPal kind of thing.
yeah. Yeah.
But even then, like that, and because you're dealing with the money, your Coinbase thing has always got two-factor authentication, and there's just a lot of security and hoops to jump through it. And because there's so much volatility, you know, the pricing is always changing, and you have to like do a calculation and figure it out. And
Mm.
what if you don't have Bitcoin in your so a lot of things are things like atomic swaps, right? Where you can basically, where a lot of these currencies can be swapped back and forth for value of equal value, right? And so, the currency that you're actually using may or may not be, may not really matter, right? You could have any number of different coins that you're holding, and if you want to pay, it doesn't really matter what they are. They can just get transferred into, some sort of other currency. So, I mean, there's, it's a rabbit hole. It's still a number of years away, but it's definitely interesting technology.
Yeah. How intense is your mining setup? Got like 500 specialized computers in your garage or something like that?
No, I just got like a handful of GPUs running on a motherboard.
Nice. It's no, it's I mean the whole centralization decentralization thing is super ironic because the whole point of cryptocurrency is for everything to be decentralized, but everything's sort of become centralized. Like I think like 70-80% of the mining activity for Bitcoin is like 5 companies, and then like you have like there's the one specific device, I can't remember what it's called, which you basically have to use for mining because it's so specialized, and like doing your own stuff with GPUs just doesn't work. So there's virtually only one company to use for like buying the mining computers, and then company like Coinbase being sort of like the PayPal of cryptocurrency is like this big centralized company. So that's um I was super bullish on Bitcoin as like a currency, and I feel like for like the past several, even though I haven't bought any, but I'm starting to think like as a currency, like I think like crypto is definitely going to work out, and it remains to be seen which like it seems like Ethereum is doing incredibly well, but it seems like Bitcoin specifically, with the high transaction costs and the speed, it's become much slower and things like that. It seems like it may not really make sense as a long term,
I
maybe
mean,
more
again,
as like a
yeah, I mean, I don't think Bitcoin's going away anytime soon. I think, essentially you have to think about it as, I think about them more as assets than like actual currencies, right? And essentially Bitcoin being gold, right? I mean, so it's slow, it's cumbersome, and, gold still maintains its value long term, and, but you're not going to carry around gold bullion and go pay people with it, right?
more of
Um,
a store of value
yeah, it's a store of
than a
value, right?
currency.
And so some of the things that they're building, like the Lightning Network, are tier 2 protocols that sit on top of things, right? So I don't know if you know anything about Lightning Network,
Mm-mm.
but basically it opens up channels so you can do a whole bunch of different transactions, small, big, or whatever, between any number of people or intermediaries, and then it essentially just settles it on the blockchain. And so, every single little transaction doesn't necessarily need to be written in stone on, the blockchain, right? Like, do you care if
Gotcha.
your coffee purchase is, permanently etched in the time of, permanently stored as part of the blockchain, like for $2?
Mhm.
Like, no. So,
Right.
if you did that transaction, ow, my back. If you did that transaction on, um,
Okay.
I just moved and it like tweaked. If you did that transaction on the Lightning Network, like it could be one of 1,000, and then it just settles all 1,000 as an aggregate back on the blockchain.
Mm,
And so
gotcha.
the amount of time that takes is a huge amount of time. But I mean, even so, like how long does it take for a credit card transaction to settle?
Long time,
Yeah,
days. Yeah.
exactly. So people complain about Bitcoin taking X number of time and money and whatever else, but I mean, it depends on, it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you start thinking about it in the context of everyday life, and especially in the U.S. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense, but like, I mean, have you ever tried to pay someone overseas? Like that
Yeah.
process is a pain in the ass, and it's not
Yeah.
cheap, and you don't know, I mean, even just wiring money, like you spend 5 minutes telling them all the bank information, and then
Mhm.
your money just magically goes somewhere, and you have no way of knowing that it was correct.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, yes, like, they have to verify it and whatever else, but what about like other countries that don't have stable currencies, right? And um, yeah, and just think about all the people that are in the middle, just like taking a slice of that. So I think it makes sense. I think it needs to, again, it just needs to evolve more.
Yeah. It'll continue to mature.
I
Um,
think I think if we can, if sort of the next wave of people starting to build things on top of the technology can build it in a way that is more efficient than what we have now, but is more closely resembles the sort of behaviors that we take, that I think that's a good next step, right? Because to try and introduce new technology and new behavior, I think is going to be very difficult.
hmm
But
hmm
I mean, going back to that whole like e-commerce checkout experience, uh, what if you had a credit card equivalent of a number that attached to your Bitcoin account, and you put that in, and you checked out, and it instantly pinged you back and said, "Hey, did you authorize this purchase?" You say
hmm
yes, and then it goes through, and you're done,
hmm
right? Like that becomes super simple, and it mirrors the flow of what you would expect, right? I mean,
hmm
you almost have like a verified bank account address that you can give somebody that requires some sort of authorization,
Yeah.
um, and then it becomes more of a pull than a push.
Yeah.
Um, and so that becomes much more intuitive for people that don't have to think about, okay, well, how am I doing these things, right? Or even so, like, you don't even need to have Bitcoin. Like the transaction gets converted instantly in and out, from US dollars, and you take advantage of the speed of the network and the process without necessarily having to worry about all the steps in between.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it will get there. I think it's just going to take time.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny though with the whole centralization, decentralization deal. Like I wouldn't feel comfortable owning Bitcoin like myself directly in my own wallet. I'd only feel comfortable having it like on Coinbase or something like that because people have gotten hacked, people have just like lost their tokens or things like that, and it's like because the nature of Bitcoin, like it's like gold. Like if you lose it, buddy. Like it's gone.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's basically digital cash, right? So,
yeah,
um, but I mean, that's the thing, right? Is like, okay, so you make that analogy, like that makes sense, but you know, how many people do you know carry any cash, let alone, their entire paycheck in cash on them at any
that's the
time?
thing. Like cash is great, but nobody would have, you like having cash requires a bank, for all intents and purposes. Like you have to have a bank that's insured where you can put the money and trust this big centralized entity to take care of it for you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
mean, it depends on your point of view and, whatever else. Like, because there's people that say, okay, and that's the benefit of it, is that you can leave your money with Coinbase and say, okay, you don't think that they're vulnerable, or you can, store it in a hardware wallet or print it out and store it, however you want to store it. But it's really up to you, right? Like
mhm,
you can rely on a third party intermediary, or you can just rely on your own security measures, right?
mhm, mhm.
It just depends on. But again, that's part of the challenge in itself too, because then people don't really understand how all this stuff works. They try and buy and sell and transfer, and they make a mistake and screw it up, and there's no undo button. And
Yeah,
that's the thing,
exactly.
right? So you can't control Z your Bitcoin wallet.
That's what somebody needs to build an undo functionality.
Well, yeah, I mean so that's the thing, right? So again, those are the things that sort of come to expect as part of our banking and transactions, is the ability to have better control over those things. And so if until someone builds something like that, it's going to be difficult for them, for people to feel comfortable with it, right? Because you basically, the question is, do you trust yourself more than you trust the bank?
Yeah.
Right? And there's plenty of people that say, yeah, like the bank's an evil entity and,
Yeah.
down with the government and all those
Yeah.
things, right? But I would
Yeah.
say that for, the vast majority of the public, um, the general public, like they trust the bank more than they trust them. Otherwise, they'd have all their cash in an envelope, hidden under their mattress.
Hmm. I was listening to this podcast. I think it was Planet Money, and they were talking about the ACH system, ACH
Mm-hmm.
payment system, and automated clearinghouse, I think it's
Yep.
called, and
Yep.
how they don't process payments over the weekend. And they were going into like, that's kind of weird. Like, like this stuff is all automated. Like these are all computers. And I can't remember what there was. It's a very old system. I think it was designed in the 70s or something like that. And it's there. I guess there's people responsible for certain parts of the process, or they have to do approvals or something like that. Anyway, it was just interesting to hear about this system that's was designed such a long time ago, is so widely used, and there's elements of it that you go like, that doesn't make any sense. Like imagine if email didn't work over the weekend, or something like
Yeah.
credit card payments didn't work over the weekend or something like that.
Well, I mean, it's like the stock market's closed,
Yeah, yeah,
but I mean, you can trade cryptocurrency, anytime, anywhere,
yeah,
whenever.
yeah. Um, well, by the way, if you got to jump, let me know. I know we've gone over.
You have
This is
18%.
18%.
That's my
Bat
that's my
battery.
battery. So
Okay, good, 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 good. I think you had some rapid. I think you were going to talk a little bit about some of your typical hiring questions, and maybe hit me with some rapid fire questions so I could demonstrate for the world to see how bad of a developer I am these days.
well, so yeah, and I was mentioning this before. Like my questions usually are more around trying to understand, just personality, how well people communicate, especially when you're talking about developers. So, I'd say the majority of the people that end up interviewing are probably are either on the development side or like project management side. And so a lot of it is around, just how they think, how they approach
Okay,
things, more of a
I could
process.
do that. I could
In
think. I
our
could think a little bit
in our
most days of the week.
technology, and then our director of development and VP of technology, they're more so assessing like actual like technical know-how.
Gotcha.
So I have one question that I typically ask people, and which is I ask them what they don't want to do.
Okay, that's a good
So
one. That's a good one.
that's sort of that's my standard question. But yeah, and then over the years I've built like this sort of, and I do it sometimes, and not I don't always do it, but I've built sort of this rapid fire question, which is, and I have one here for you specifically. And so I'll give you two options. You have to pick one,
Okay.
and you just pick whatever the first thing is that pops into your head, whatever the first one is that you feel most inclined to.
Okay.
And so I've mixed in, I've got some technology things, and I've mixed in some other things, and so this one's specifically for you.
Okay. All right. Let's do it. Let's get it.
You ready?
I'm ready, sir.
All right,
Let's
hold
get to
on. Let me
work.
just put this. I want to be able to see your reaction when I do it, so I need to put it. Yeah, because I mean, the reality is that sometimes the part for me that's interesting is not necessarily just what you respond, but how you respond, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of it's around thought process, and so anyway, all right. So you can pick one or the other, but not both, and just do it as fast as you can. Coffee or Red Bull?
Coffee.
PHP Storm or Sublime?
PHP Storm. Come on. Relax.
MySQL or MariaDB?
MySQL. I don't have any experience with Maria directly.
No. Apache
Although
or
I think my MariaDB is probably better from what I've read. I think the performance
it
benchmarks are
depends
better
on
and
who you
stuff.
read, but
Okay.
Apache or Nginx?
Apache, just well, again, mostly where my experience is as far as configuration stuff goes. Nginx is probably better most of the time, faster for most things.
Tabs or spaces?
Spaces, bro, for life. This is a space that I'm showing here on screen with my hands.
CSV or JSON?
JSON.
Power through it or take a break?
Yes. It depends, man. That's a hard
Yeah, big
one.
one.
Take a break.
Okay.
It depends. Am I 5 minutes in, then power through? Am I 3 hours in? Take a break. Come on, that's an impossible one.
Well, 5 minutes in, you're not gonna like power through it. You're just like at that point,
You're just
you're just
going
still
through it
going.
regular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On time or on budget?
On time. That's a hard, it's a hard one. Let's
That's my project
on
manager
time.
one that I
On
yeah.
time.
Do it myself or delegate?
Do it myself, unfortunately.
Ask for help or Google it?
Google it.
Skype or
And ask for
Slack?
help on Twitter. Slack.
Magento 1 or Magento 2?
Magento one.
How about Laravel or Magento?
These are great questions, Laravel. These are
Uh,
fantastic questions.
MailChimp or .mailer?
Get out. You know what? We're done. I'm done. I'm leaving right now. I can't do it, bro. I have beef with both of them. I refuse to answer that question. I
All right,
absolutely
that's a hard
refuse. That's the
pass.
one question. That's a hard pass on that one. I have to. I
Okay.
go dot mailer. I'll go dot mailer before I'll go
See,
MailChimp.
you caved.
Yeah, I did.
Agile or waterfall?
Agile.
10 ifs or a switch statement?
10 Fs. Come on, somebody. Old
Mark
school.
Lavelle or Roy Rubin?
Roy Rubin, get out of here. Get out of here with that.
Confront or let go?
Let go. That's a hard one. These are
Early
great
morning or late
questions.
night?
Early morning. Early bird gets the worm.
Process or results?
Results.
Motivate or inspire?
Motivate. Inspire. Those are so similar. I don't get that question. I rate
Uh,
that question as 1 out of 10 so far. The other questions have been fantastic.
you're not following the rules. You're only supposed to answer one or the other. Huh. Follow the
Rule
rules
breaker.
or do it your own way.
Do it your own way.
Yeah, exactly. Phone or email?
Email.
Build or buy?
Build.
There you go.
That's awesome, man. I really like that. I'm going to publish this as a clip. That was fun. I'm going to just have to bleep out the dot mailer part. That's cool. And then so
are you sponsored by .mailer now?
no, we're not. Absolutely not.
Here's a good one for you. Is a tip for this show thing.
Okay.
Which I took from one of the blockchain Bitcoin podcasts that I listen to. One of the things that they ask when they interview people is, in 10 words or less, can you explain, Bitcoin? Which I think is a really interesting question, and they say they do it because it forces people not only to like whittle it down, but also it makes people focus on where they see the value in these things, like what's important to them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna ask you a similar question: is, in 10 words or less, can you describe what you do?
What I do?
Yeah.
I connect people in the Magento ecosystem.
See, that was good.
That was good. I like that. I should use something like. There's this one AI podcast I listen to, and he always starts off with, "What is artificial intelligence?" And people answer it in very different ways, and then he always argues with them about their answers. It's slightly annoying, but it's kind of neat at the same time. I should do something like that.
Cool.
So that was it.
That was it.
That was awesome. So that's part of your interview process.
It is sometimes. I've done it. I don't know if I've ever done it for developers. I've done it for more operations type people. I did it for our office manager. The office manager stuff was more like they had three options of like,
Coffee or tea.
no, it was more like love it, hate it, whatever, you know.
Mm,
So just to kind of get a sense of like how much they care about doing, you know, maybe trivial things or, you know, things like, I don't know, helping someone or not helping someone, but, you know, the general gist of where they kind of, what they're willing to do, what they're not willing to do.
right. That's cool.
Um,
That's really neat. And then you just sort of like record their responses, and then you have sort of a benchmark, and then you can jump off into deeper conversations on
yeah.
those.
I like to see how people answer it, you know, the ones that they like have a really hard time on, right?
Yeah.
And some of them, you know, some of them are sort of telling in terms of, you know, just personality traits, right? Like early morning, late night, you know,
Yeah.
are you more willing to like ask for help or just try and like do it on your own? You know, how much of a team player are you? Like things like that.
Yeah.
Just it gives a little bit of insight, you know, when you
Yeah.
kind of force someone to answer something really quick like that. You know, I don't put too much stock on it. I think it's, you know, it's kind of fun, but it also kind of helps,
Yeah.
especially, you know, especially when you have people that even just the sheer exercise when people are just kind of like, I don't like this, you know,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
it's like, well, you know, it's
Like
just kind of a fun little thing,
if they
like, you
have
know, just
fun with it
entertain it.
versus yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You're like, okay, well, you're a grumpopotamus and you don't even want to, you're not even willing to like, you know, do this little exercise with me, then like, what's it going to be like to work with you, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That's funny. So out of the questions I answered, which was the one that like stuck out to you most, or you were like, wow, he has issues there, or like was the like which one like did anything stick out to you?
I thought you were going to have more of a struggle on the Lavelle versus Ruben question.
What? Get out of here. It's ridiculous.
I was surprised,
Lavelle
even
isn't
though you
good.
objected to the Mailchimp dot mailer, that you picked one.
I was like,
Um,
it was like that was the whole purpose of the exercise was you have to pick one. So I felt like you know,
no, I know.
punking out would have been a little wrong. So I was like, all right, I'll do it. I'll do it.
Um, I think the confront or let go is the most telling for you
Really?
because you were
What did
like
I say?
confront, let go.
Ah, okay. You saw me let go like physically right before your
Yeah, you
eyes.
were like, I feel like I should confront, but I'm just gonna let go.
That's really good. That's
Which,
so good.
I mean, most of the other ones, I think, yeah, I think I guessed what you were gonna say for the most part. Some of them were just for fun. Sometimes I throw some random ones in there, sometimes just for fun, just to kind of keep it lighthearted.
Right, 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 right,
Um,
right.
but I mean, you know, power through or take a break is also, you know, kind of just is your, you know, what's your personality, right? Are you sort of fight or flight, or are you better off, you know, just trying to work through something, or are you the kind of person that needs to like take a step back, you know,
Right.
do it yourself versus delegating, you know, can you, you know, are you, I wouldn't say not necessarily just a team player, but like, you know, how do you operate? Like, do you like to just do things yourself, or are you okay with trying
Yeah.
to, you know, get other people
Yeah.
involved? Um,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
think
early morning, late night is kind of like, you know, when do you have the most energy?
right.
You know, so
Yeah, I think that like some of those questions are like I definitely know where I stand and like whether it's a strength or like like how it's a strength or a weakness, like the work together versus in a team and the mornings versus whatever. The power through versus take a break.
I'm gonna
I'm
take you on a
very
tour. I'm gonna take you on a
yeah.
quick tour because I'm running out of battery juice here.
Okay, you do that. Hey, that's a great idea actually.
What an
We've
office
got
tour.
more our viewer count has steadily picked up. So
Well, the
this is
first
kind of
half was very serious.
it was the first few minutes were very, very
I've been, I'm like,
were
oh,
very
so
fun. Then we got
here's our,
serious and now we're
this is
having some more
our,
fun.
this is our content studio.
Oh dude, we haven't There's so many things. You guys are like the layers. You guys have so much going on. Is that the product studio that you told me about?
Yeah, so we take photos there, and we have some like 3D printers here too.
Dude, that's so freaking cool. There's so many things we haven't talked about. You guys got a lot going on. So the product studio, you basically built
Oh,
that
and
out so that
here's our mural.
hey, you did forget the order. You were totally off on the order. Bravery wasn't the first one.
I think they did that for design purposes.
They that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, because they stacked all the words on top of each other, so you don't want it to go like long word, skinny word, long word, skinny word, skinny word, long word. It would visually be like not great.
But you're the one that was talking about how important the order of these values was.
Um,
That doesn't make any sense. Dude, that's a cool
well,
background. You should have done it there from the get.
oh, what, the window?
Yeah. Do you watch the Joe Rogan podcast at all?
No.
It's really interesting. I've watched it for a little while. I kind
And
of
then
love
I have
how.
my own like word wall of like mantra things.
Oh, what? Let me see that. Let me see the wall of mantras. Why is one mantra? That's
Not really
good.
mantras, but like, you know, they're things
Words,
to remember.
things to live by.
One of the ones that I say a lot is perfect over perfect, right?
What?
Perfect.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
That's tricky.
And then, oh, this was one we
The
couldn't.
funniest thing about perfect over perfect is it would make 0 sense written down.
Well, I wrote it down. Well, you can see it. I wrote it down phonetically. So one is
Oh,
P-E-R-F-E-C-T, the other one
can
is
you?
P-E-R-F-I-K-T.
Oh, okay. Can you turn the laptop? I can't see it anymore.
Oh, sorry, I'm trying to stay plugged in.
Oh,
And then the other one was no exceptions,
no exceptions. Interesting.
which was the concept of there should be no like in your code there should be no like errors or exceptions, and if there are, that you should know what they are.
Interesting. Like you should catch them, catch all your exceptions.
Well, one, because lots of times like when we'll take over a project from someone else, and just the error logs are just filled up with stuff,
Yeah.
right? And so the idea is, in theory, there should be no exceptions, but there are times when it's valid for stuff to be in there, or it's not feasible to try and fix it for whatever reason, right?
Hmm.
Work with me here.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely agree.
And so if for some reason that we can't have 0 exceptions, you should at least know, KNOW, what they are, so that you can be responsible for them and or know how to handle them.
Ah, okay.
It's a
I couldn't
plan
see it
where
on the board. I couldn't see on the board. Is the expression KNOW exceptions?
yes, with NO capitalized in the middle. So it's K capital NOW
Wow.
exception.
Wow, that's a mind bender. That's a full on mind blower. That's cool, man. So you're super into like sayings and stuff like that. Like
I wouldn't say yes. I'm very good at twisting words and people's words.
I want to ask you a couple questions.
Go for it.
What are you bad at?
What am I bad at? What am I bad at?
Haha, payback, sucker.
I'm bad at not being bad at things. Answering them from the fly.
Oh,
No, I mean,
don't say
I
I
think
work too hard.
the next meeting is starting now.
You got a meeting?
I don't know. That's what it
You're
said.
bad at scheduling. Or I'm bad
I'm
at
trying to think.
scheduling.
No, there's obviously lots of things that I'm bad at, right? I mean, not everyone's perfect. So, um, I'd say one of the things that like I generally have to work at is like um, remembering to like stop and appreciate, right? Both the things that,
Mm.
we've done and we've accomplished. And then, I'm bad at, um, I'm bad at compliments.
Okay, that's good. The first one was kind of a humble brag, but compliments, that's good. That's a legit like something you're bad at. Yeah. And that's probably something that I think I'm bad at that too. That's probably something as an employer you have to really work at if it doesn't come natural for you, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's one of those things you have to just constantly remember to say, because it's not like I don't appreciate or value. I 100% do. It's just I don't always vocalize that.
Case in point, you've given me zero compliments so far. We've been doing a stream for 2 hours. You haven't given me a single compliment.
You haven't complimented me either.
Now you're nitpicking. That's sounds like that's another one of your weaknesses.
You're really good at asking me questions.
Oh man, it's funny.
You're really good at rocking in your chair without making me nauseous.
This
I will
chair
give
is
you a
too.
compliment because I was listening to the Mage talk this morning,
Okay.
and Philip was commenting about how you rub your beard on the microphone,
Yeah,
and I would say that you haven't done that today.
haven't done
So
that in some time.
you're
Thank you.
really good at not rubbing your beard on the microphone.
Here we go.
That looks really bad.
That was gross. I apologize for everybody. I had no
Do you
choice.
have like beard hairs like stuck in the microphone part?
It's possible. I wouldn't. I'm not. If there were, I wouldn't actually tell you.
Like
Um,
snacks and things? Or
there's one Cheeto, okay, Adam. You had to know there's one Cheeto,
if
okay?
you like
Not a lot
rotate
of
it, is there like corn niblets and stuff?
It's like the back seat of your car where your kid seats are. It's like that. Under,
No, I mean, in all seriousness, no. I mean, I give you a lot of credit for all the content and stuff that you put out. And obviously, with Mage Talk and all the other stuff that you've done, put a lot back into the community, and so
wow.
definitely appreciate that.
Wow. That
It's not
seemed
it's
very
not
difficult for
easy.
you. That seemed
It's
very painful for you to give that compliment.
usually better when I mix it in with some like backhanded comment too, but
You have to ease your way into it. You got to give like three backhanded, and then you'll dip like a real one, and then you'll give like you'll sandwich it with like backhanded compliments. Oh man.
yeah, but yes. But I don't do it to be a prick. I do it to be funny. Sometimes it comes off wrong.
No, you have a really good sense of humor. It cracks me up. Very dry sense of humor.
Why, thank you.
It's like you're a Brit. It's like, is that a Boston thing?
It might be a little bit.
Yeah. You're like a
Yeah.
Brit living inside of a San
I do
Diegan.
that. I do that to my daughter. Like sometimes she'll be like, I don't know. She'll tell me, she'll be like, "Dad, you smell," or something like that, and I'll be like, I'm like, "Well, thank you." She's like, "What do you mean, thank you?" I'm like, "I don't know, thanks. What else do you want me to say to that?"
Yeah. Yeah, I've trained my daughter in sarcasm so much that she's like getting better than me now. Like I can't pull anything on her anymore. It's
Well, that's
wonderful.
hard to believe.
Yeah.
You see what I did there?
I see what you did there. Oh man. Um,
All right. I
cool.
I have another meeting. I got to run to lunch, but I have
All
one
right,
thought for
beautiful.
you. I have one. Here's one of my ideas that
Lay it on
we
me.
we can work on it if you want to. Not that you don't have enough things to do, but we should create a e-commerce award site like the Webbies and all that stuff.
Oh, I love that idea. It's a
Here's
great
my name
idea.
for it. My name for it is the e-commies. And I'm gonna have someone design a trophy. It is like an iron fist holding a shopping cart.
I'm so sold on that. I'm so sold on that.
And then
Oh
like we
man,
can
that's
do an
funny.
annual conference in Russia every year.
Oh man. Oh, that's really funny. All right, well, I'm going to let you go, Adam Levenson, Digital Operative. That was fantastic. Tomorrow, we have a hero of mine, Christian Munch, Nets98, creator of N98 Mage Run, on the podcast. It's going to be fun. Make sure you're there. And that's all. See you guys later.
Thank you.